Hello, it is I, Serendipity Wyrd, here tonight to talk about the runes. I alluded at the end of my last video about working with deity, which is totally a subject we're going to come back to because I have a lot more to say on it. And I realized after I put it up and everything, I was like, really, this was a conversation about working with deity, but like relationships with deity. And I have so much more to say about actually like the ways that I work with my deities and stuff like that. But anyway, that's another video. We're gonna come back to that subject is the point. Today though, I want to talk a little bit about the runes, a little bit about my journey with them and all that good stuff, because I am actually totally stepping out of my comfort zone, being the brave little toaster, and offering a rune course. Yay! For about a year and a half, I have been considering bringing my knowledge and outlook on the runes, specifically the Elder Futhark rune set. That's the only rune set I work with. Bringing that and sharing it because I see a lot of people asking often about meanings for runes, how you work with the runes, divination, magic, all this fun stuff. And I'm like, I could teach that. What? But imposter syndrome, all the things I talked about back in the overcoming fear video, which I should totally like link down below or put in an iCard. I don't know. I'm still getting used to this YouTubing thing. I should link it somewhere for you in case you haven't seen it. But anyway, all that imposter syndrome stuff kept me in this space where I was like, I'm not ready to talk about that. And the fact that I come at it from a little bit, believe it or not, a little bit of a different sort of standpoint, not from like, I don't know, traditional Asatru heathen outlook necessarily. So I've been very nervous for a long time to teach because, you know, all of these invented things in my head about how my outlook wasn't valid or something. But we're a brave little toaster this year and we don't care about none of that jazz. So we're doing the thing. And so I'm making a video about the runes. It's almost 1 o'clock in the morning when I'm recording this, but my makeup is just freaking amazing today. I'm super happy with it. I've loved it all day, and every Wednesday I do my makeup because of a live broadcast I do over in the Witch With Me community on Facebook that we put on the Witch With Me channel, and I get all fancy for that. And so I always want to record videos afterwards, but like one thing leads to another, and this is not about the runes, but you're hearing it anyway because you know what? We don't edit stuff right now. And anyway, I'm really feeling it still. So despite the fact that it's 1 in the morning and I might regret this later, we're forging on ahead and recording a video and being awesome and talking about the runes. So let's actually do that, shall we? So things that I see a lot. The runes in general, we talk about them as runes. If you start to study things, you will actually see that people refer to the individual symbols as rune staves. Fun fact. I came into connection with the runes earlier, as most tangent, squirrel, butterfly. As with most things in my practice, it takes me like years to realize that I'm working with a specific thing or that is a witchy thing, which is really silly, and I could give so many examples. I don't know, maybe there's a video in that, but I did that with the runes as well. Sometime around 10-ish years ago, maybe moving toward 11 years at this point. I don't remember if it was before the relationship with the person who is now the hub sand had started, or if it wasn't until after we were like romantically entangled. But I started learning and writing with the runes as a substitution cipher, or a one-for-one like alphabet substitution. Substitution cipher just sounds really freaking cool. I like the way the words feel in my mouth. Anyway, so what I mean by that is I learned the transliterations for the runic shapes with the Roman/Latin alphabet, which is what we typically use to write in English. And so I used the runes as a way to write things. To write them, and they'd be all secret, and they'd feel kind of magical, and that was really cool. Especially as it was something that I was sharing with the then boyfriend, now Hubsand. And it was like, we were in a weird poly situation. That's a whole nother story. Anyway. And so there was kind of this desire to keep like things that were private between us, like private, using encoded language. Not for like weird, nefarious, deceitful, any kind of jazz like that, because it was well known in the context of the relationship that who was in relationships too. But there was a desire to, you know, keep intimate things private, as one sometimes wants to do. Anyway, so started using the runes for writing. And it never really occurred to me at that point that they could really be anything more than that. I mean, I think somewhere in my mind, you know, I was like, well, obviously they're magical. I'm using them for kind of, you know, secretive writing purposes. But I really wasn't in touch with my magic in the same way then. I was doing energy work and that sort of thing, but definitely wasn't one of the, you know, most witchy, quote unquote, points necessarily in my life. So I wasn't, you know, equating things in the same way. Anyway, so for some years that happened. I started going to pagan festivals at some point, or a pagan festival, and I would like write my notes afterwards, like in my journal sometimes, in runes, you know, kind of book of shadowy type things. Like I would use the runes to write things. And that continued for probably about 5 years. And then, and this is where it kind of overlaps with that working with deity subject, and then the deities of the Norse pantheon kind of stormed into my life. And I very quickly was associated with Freya. And Freya made it very clear from the beginning that I was going to learn the runes, I was going to learn their meanings, and that was that. And I would teach it eventually. And I was like, whoa, lady, slow your roll. I just met you. What? But at the same time, there was a part of me that was like, oh yeah, I know. We're going to do that. Cool. Totes. So I started learning them, and I started learning their meanings, and I started thinking about their shapes in a different way, and I would write them kind of more often and stuff like that. And thus began my magical relationship with the runes. So we moved from this space where I was very familiar with their shapes, could not have told you their names at all, or any sort of meanings. I just had them associated with letters that I use for English. Cool. Over the course of the past 5 years, I have read a lot of myth, a lot of different sources for runic knowledge. Of course, I've read some books, you know, that people have put out on like, here's how you work with the runes. I've read a lot of web pages because as a techno witch, like I'm always Googling stuff, and I like to compare like different people's outlooks on things, especially divination sets, because it's always super fascinating to me how people interpret similar symbols or keywords, or like where people go on their adventures with divination. So tons of research, including like reading academic papers on well, this is this rune stave, and this is exactly where it's come from here to there, and this is what we think, and why it would have been used for this phenome and phoneme. I don't know. Like, weird linguistic stuff that I halfway understand, and some of it just kind of goes, whoo. To get to this point now, where I'm like, yeah, it's time to teach the things, and it's time to empower other people to use the runes, because I see all the time people get rune sets and then they're just kind of like, what do I do with this now? And it seems like really kind of an intimidating process. And I have some theories around this, because as much as it might be something that's of interest, there's not a lot to necessarily go on visually with the runes. And in a lot of our witchy shenanigans that we get into, right, we often hear vision as sort of the first sense to really use for things. Like, when I think about the tarot or an oracle card or something like that, the visuals of it allow people to read those divination sets, even if they don't have a wealth of knowledge of what traditional meanings are or what have you. There's images that can spark intuitive connections. Even if you don't have, super strong like psychic skills, you can still see images and be like, oh, I see a fish. Fish they live in water, so maybe this is about emotions or something. There's context and there's clues to draw from in order to build interpretations. With the runes, you got a couple of lines. Now, believe it or not, if you are unaware, those lines actually do form pictograms or pictographs of sorts. I don't know which word is correct there, whatever. And you can see kind of pictures behind them when you learn them. But learning them is a whole thing, because the shapes aren't super distinctive. Like, there are several that would be really easy to mix up. Fehu and Ansus come to mind with that. And it's just not intuitive in the same way as like a picture of like a figure and some props and like a background. So I think that's my personal theory on one reason why people struggle with the idea of learning the runes, or why they maybe are hesitant. It seems like a lot. I think it's a divination method and a magical resources which can just feel really super overwhelming. Also, language. The names of the runes aren't English, obviously, because they come from Scandinavia and Germanic resources. Resources is not the word at all I'm trying to go for here, but we're rolling with it. We're continuing. We're going. Germanic-based language sources, I think, is the direction I was trying to go. And so, with those, the sounds don't necessarily, like, if you look at the things spelled out, for example, we'll take the first rune, which is Fehu, F-E-H-U is generally how it's spelled. It's pretty easy to look at that and kind of be like, huh? What? Huh? And I think we already are missing an intuitive connection between the shapes and being able to like easily identify the differences between the shapes. And then we're kind of missing maybe a bit of intuitive connection to the sounds, because the sounds are not all sounds that we typically hear if we are English speakers. And I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, ever going to pretend that I pronounce any of them correctly. I make an effort to listen to people who reconstruct Old Norse language and things like that so I can get a sense, but I do not speak Icelandic which is where a lot of the modern Icelandic is where a lot of the pronunciations are pulled from. I don't speak that. So that's problematic in pronunciation. Luckily, I do have a belief that the gods are smarter than us, for lack of a more eloquent way of putting it, but that language, strict pronunciation of language is not a barrier to spiritual understanding in my worldview, because when you're working with spirit and communicating with spirit, at least in my experience, and again, this is totally just me, so if it is different from you, and if you believe differently, by all means, I am not telling you you are wrong. I would appreciate it if you do not tell me that I am wrong. But in my experience, spirit doesn't speak language as it is anyway. So whether we pronounce it 100% correctly is kind of a moot point. I do think it's incredibly beneficial to learn as closely as we can to what a proper pronunciation for a thing might be, because I think that's respectful, and respect is important. So it's worthwhile to research things like how a language evolves, especially for things like the runes, where we don't have a lot of background info necessarily to go on. And I'm not going to get into all of that, because in this video, I really just kind of want to talk about why I think it would be valuable for me to teach this course. Both kind of as a why I think it's needed on the student side of things, and also why it's relevant to me to like step into this role for myself. As I've been developing this, because this totally this came out of the woodwork in a way. Like I said, it's something I've been considering for about 1.5 years, and every once in a while I kind of get the ping, mostly from Freya, who's like, knock knock knock, hello, you're supposed to be doing a thing, when are you gonna do the thing? And I'm like, I'm busy being scared and little over here. I don't want to be a brave little toaster, but we are being a brave little toaster now. So I am responding to that call. But I completely derailed from anywhere that I was going or anything that I know that I was talking about. So we'll just go back to things that I see why people look for assistance in learning the runes. So the shapes are kind of funky, and I think that doesn't come very intuitively. The sounds, or the idea of trying to comprehend what the names are, how you say them, stuff like that, can also be a barrier to really wanting to dive into studying that on one's own. And in general, I think especially with magical things, it's really helpful to have a teacher that you can communicate with and that you can interact with. Yes, in these pandemic times, meeting up with somebody face to face really isn't an option, and because you need to stay safe. But we have the amazingness of the internet, and we can get together in virtual formats and convey information and learn from one another and fun stuff like that, which is fantastic, might I say. And something that I've really been enjoying, like that's honestly what's been getting me through things, is gathering with people and talking about witchy magical things and whatnot. So it came to my attention that I could provide more of that, but through a rune context. What else? So the meanings also, you get a lot of, if you do research like online, you can get a whole different wide variety of meanings with the runes. So I think that there's kind of a high barrier of entry, or something. Again, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, so if my words don't make a lot of sense, I'm sorry. Steep? I don't know. I'm getting like this cliff picture in terms of like trying to learn the meanings, because there's not necessarily something visual immediately to link it to, and the meanings can vary widely because the runes are freaking mysterious like that. And what we have to go on historically, which again, I'm not going too much into detail about all of this, but is rather limited and gives us kind of the starting point, but then there's a lot of different directions you can go with, which is freaking awesome. That's actually why I really like the runes, is because it's, for me, it's a lot about feeling into the energy current of them to pluck out their messages. At least from a divination context. It's a little bit different when I work with them magically most of the time. Though there are times that I lean into, ooh, whose energy current feels right for this particular working. A thing that I shared recently in the group for my course that I'm offering is around the materials that your runes are made of, or how you have a set of runes, that sort of thing. So when I first started out, I took a very probably like traditionalist and kind of conservative view on things. I was like, oh, this is the way it is, and this is the only way I can do the thing, which would be that rune staves that I'm going to work with must be made of some sort of a wood. And that is mandatory because that's what we see sort of in the lore. And so that's the only thing that could possibly be acceptable. I was very rigid in a lot of my thinking in terms of Norse-related pagan practices because of what I got out of reading the books I had on hand and that sort of thing. Which is also why I don't really interact with Asatru/heathen communities, is because I feel like a lot of those spaces are much more rigid than my creative self feels comfortable in. I have nothing against them. I think they're awesome. And it's really, really great that there are communities, at least the communities that are welcoming and open and very clearly anti-racist. Those communities are great. But I personally just kind of decided I was not interacting in any of those spaces because it was too much effort to sort out which ones were not secretly racist and which ones weren't going to laugh at me for working with Loki, and so on and so forth. So I've kind of been on my own learning about the runes and figuring out how they work for me and what sort of methods of working with their energy currents works for me, and what they feel like and what they mean and all this awesome stuff. And it's been a really, really, really fun adventure, honestly. And my own outlook towards them has changed a lot over the past 5 years that I've been actively working with them as a magical tool and as energy currents. Because like I mentioned in my video about working with deity, I also see the runes as these energy currents that I can tap into. So materials, so when we take the runes out of their amazing magical energy currents that they reside in and create a physical embodiment of them, what does that need to be made out of? And how do they convey their energy and that sort of thing? And like I said, early in my practice, I was super rigid and I was like, it must be wood and that's the only option. But recently, I've really shifted. Like, I even used to think that runes carved into stones, whether those are semi-precious stones or, like a river rock you found, whatever, I felt like those were somehow less legitimate just because that's not what happened, you know, like 2,000 years ago, nearly 2,000 years ago. And now I find that really silly because the material is a conveyor of its own energy current. Okay? So, wood is awesome because you can wood burn things into it, including runes, and I love the look of that. That's so great. And depending on what type of wood you use, that could carry its own correspondence and have its own energy that it's lending to the idea. But why would it be wrong for somebody to work with runes that are carved into stone? Like, when I started to question that, I'm like, yeah, serendipity, that makes no sense. Like, what are you even doing? Why are you having some weird rigid rule about how things can work? And I definitely felt that way about like polymer clay or resin as a material, because I'm like, huh, those aren't even natural. How could they possibly conduct magic? And then I had to have like an honest chat with myself and be like, hey self, do you do magic through a computer? Do you cast spells on Instagram sometimes? Yeah, then what business do you have saying that a rune can't work if it's in polymer clay or in resin? Which I would have never said to anyone else, right? This was all like rules imposed on my own practice. And so I dropped that. And I was like, well, that's really silly. And that makes no dang sense. So we're going to drop that. So now I am here to tell you that from my perspective, the runes can work for you regardless of the material that they are inscribed into or written upon. They convey their magic regardless. But the vessel that they are inscribed on or written on can lend its powers as well. So depending or considering, I am trying to combine words together. Depending on what your goals are, make it totally relevant to consider what sort of material. So this idea of a rose quartz rune set, I think, has been kind of cropping up in my mind, which is also weird in its own way because I had this funky relationship to rose quartz for a long time. But now I really love rose quartz. And so I could see creating a set or procuring a set of runes out of rose quartz, particularly if you want to make those messages perhaps a little more gentle and a little more compassionate, which are not at all strong traits of the runes. Compassion and gentleness are not at all typically what these energies deliver to you. They tend to be, in my experience, again, your mileage may vary. In my experience, the runes are super tell it as it is. They will hand you to yourself in a very harsh manner and in no uncertain terms once you have a relationship with them. So I totally can see the appeal of having them inscribed in rose quartz, where maybe there's a little element of love infused in those messages instead of just like, rah! That's the technical term, is rah! And I no longer have this whole view of like, oh my gosh, the material must be natural. Because if nothing else, dang, some of those resin runes are freaking gorgeous. Yes. And the Freya part of me loves things that are pretty. Like, let's just be honest. If it's shiny and it's sparkly and it's glittery, I'm probably in love with it. So, yeah, there's that. Building a relationship with the runes that you're working with, if you're using a set, if you're, especially for divination, I think that that is super important. Just like building a relationship with a tarot deck or an oracle deck might be. I believe these things have spirits of their own. Our divination tools, our magic tools. I mean, in my world, I'm pretty animistic, I think. And all the things have little spirits that talk to us if we listen. Or maybe I'm just crazy. I wonder if I say that like every video. Probably. Anyway. So when we work with the same tool again and again, we develop a relationship with that. See, everything comes back to relationships with me. All of it. It's all relationships, all the way down. So the more you work with your rune set, the more you bond with it, the more you're going to understand the messages that it is delivering for you, or how those energy currents can assist you in magic. One thing that really freaking sucks about the runes is the fact that they have been appropriated again and again by freaking hate groups and people who want to claim that they're only for, you know, people of Northern European descent or European descent, aka white people. I am not a fan of any of that BS, and it makes me really sad that they have been used that they were appropriated during the Nazi regime, and that they still are used by all these like white supremacism groups and whatnot. And that's something to be aware of if you're going to work with the runes, is that particularly if you're going to have them tattooed on you in some way, that you are aware of what you're doing, what message you're putting on you, that you are not accidentally choosing something that is significant in hate groups and that sort of thing. Like, definitely do some freaking research around the runes before you decide to get tattoos. That's that mini soapbox. But I also just think in general it's a good idea to have that history in mind, because it's very real, that appropriation. It's incredibly significant in terms of, like, you just got to know that. You got to know that that's a piece of their history. But I also don't think that it's a good idea to let that be a barrier to you deciding to work with them, because in and of themselves, just like the tarot is not of the devil or anything, the runes are not inherently evil or hate aligned or any kind of crap like that. They're a tool, and how you use the tool and what you use the tool for impacts it, right? Yes. But you do want to make sure you're not actually using any of the freaking varieties of crap that was used to do horrific things to people. You don't want to accidentally look like a Nazi. That's what I'm trying to say here. Let go of that. Whew, bring it down. What else would we want to talk about? Singing. So I sing to my runes, and I think that like, it just kind of happened naturally. I didn't really plan on it. I just started singing to them, and then it didn't really stop. And now I sing to my tarot cards and stuff too. In the practices that we see in Norse mythology, the little snippets of magic that are interwoven in the Icelandic sagas and a little bit here and there in the myths themselves that we find in the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, we get this sense of Galder, this magical singing that happens, that's how spell work is derived. So I feel like maybe there's this energy of song that is inherent with the tool and with the practice, that just kind of made its way known to me. I don't know. That's my theory of how or why that came into being for me. But the runes seem to dig it. They seem to like when I sing to them, so I do. I use them personally for divination. The divination is generally really super intense in a very different way than it is when I work with tarot. It often speaks in a snapshot. Like, it gives me this energetic imprint of like the right now, which is always subject to change. I very much have this belief in our divination shows future potentiality, but we hold the power to shift and change it. Because I would rather be empowered to weave my way through the weird than to think that fate is just delivered to me in some sort of absolutely predetermined fashion. I choose empowerment. But they speak very strongly, and the predictive elements of them has always been really intense for me. I feel like, in general, in comparing like divination systems, my experiences with the runes, they tend to be more of a predictive sort of divination source than, say, tarot. Not that you can't predict things with tarot, but the runes really like to give me specific prediction type information, which is freaking intense and crazy sometimes. I like to do divination with them in sort of a variety of ways. I kind of break all the rules that I can in all the things and figure out what works for me, and then, I move on. That's my method then going forward. So with the runes, when I want a short message and just kind of a little snippet, what I like to call when I want to glimpse the weird, I will pull individual runes out of the lovely bag of the runes, and that's it. Like, I just pull them. And then when I really want to do a reading, and these things take a minimum of like 30 minutes, but probably almost always closer to an hour, then I do a whole casting of them, throw them out, see where things fall, what they're close to. I have a whole process I've devised for this in terms of layout, and I had a painting that I would cast the runes upon, but it suffered a little bit of an accident recently, so it's kind of out of commission for the moment. But it's such a different method of divination from the tarot. I suppose you could kind of do like a 52 card pickup sort of thing, well, a 78 card pickup, and just kind of throw your cards in the air, see what happens. That does sound like the kind of fun thing I would do from time to time. But casting the runes is this really fascinating feeling of interjecting into the stream of randomness and a little bit of chaos, because you don't really have control over where things are going, and it feels more divinatory in general to me. And it's awesome. And I love it. And I'm getting all tingly just talking about it. Freaking love the runes, y'all. That's really what this whole thing is about, is I love working with the runes. And I've denied that from time to time. And I don't know why. I don't know why. But I love them. I love them so much. I finally made my own set for myself this past year. My first set, the boyfriend gave me for our first Yule, and I love that set so much, but I needed to make my own. and it took me some hours to saw all the wood by hand, and I was really, really happy with the process. And the whole time I had Odin just like whispering to me, like, it's a sacrifice. This is what you do. It's sacrifice. And I was like, thanks, man. Because it was so hot. Florida, sun. Even in, October I was making them, I think. It was still freaking hot. And then I used a wood burner to inscribe the runes. And now I have the set. And I made them their little bag. And the bag is made out of my grandmother's a t-shirt that I had from her. She has passed. And the inside is a bed sheet that I slept on a lot. So it's very important to me. I love it. It feels right, like the connection to kind of ancestry and the connection to like the space of my rest and my respite. I like it a lot. Also in general, working with the runes. So I feel like it's a life-changing thing in and of itself, and there are deities very closely associated with both the individual rune staves and also the runes as a whole. Odin, obviously, if you have any sense of the myths, is the biggest figure, probably. Although for me, Freya really has come forward a ton about the runes, way more than Odin in my personal practice. Although he's always just kind of there, and I'm always kind of like, is there a way for me to do this without you? Hasn't really fully been, for the record. But so my point is, like, not to scare you or turn you off from working with the runes, but I do think it's good to be aware of the fact that you may find yourself suddenly with new deities cropping in that want some attention or to help you in the process, and it can be life-changing. Honestly, I think working with the runes can really be a life-changing experience, and it's a lifelong experience. I definitely, obviously I would not be teaching a course if I did not feel like I had some level of understanding, and I don't want to say mastery because I hate that word, but I think it conveys the idea, like some sort of legitimate experience and knowledge of them, some deep and profound knowledge. But I also know that this knowledge that I have and the wisdom that the runes bring me is going to continue to unfold throughout the whole rest of my life, and probably beyond, because I'm sure I will probably pick them up and work with them again in the next life. And like, it's awesome. I love it. It's so good. It's really amazing to know that as much as I feel that I know them and understand them now, that every time I work with them, things shift a little bit and they bring me new knowledge and new wisdom and new experiences and different ways of understanding. Not only these little stick-like symbols and the meanings ascribed to them, but like life in general and the world in general and the metaphysical world. They are so freaking powerful. And I think that's pretty much everything I have to say on this. I've apparently been rambling for like 44 minutes. Oh my gosh. I'm trying, y'all, to make like 20 or 30 minute videos. It's not working, apparently. But if you are intrigued at all by the runes and you haven't really been sure where to go with that, as I have mentioned, I am teaching a course in this that starts on February 27th. And if you're watching this way after that's relevant to you at all, you should probably still look and see if I'm teaching a course, because I'm pretty sure this is not going to be the only one ever. But I am super excited about it. The link and everything will be down in the description box for the group, mostly running it through Facebook group, but weekly live classes on Zoom, 2 class options a week so that we can get together and we can talk about these things. Because I think we learn so much better when we're in connection with people and when we have the opportunity to explore something, especially for those of us who might be a little bit like me, an external processing sort of person. I learn by sharing and doing and interacting, and I can't imagine that I'm the only one who learns in that way at all. Like, I'm sure that's really relevant for lots of people. So if that feels like it would be relevant for you, cool. Check out the link below on my website. I lay it all out for you, the whole plan, and I'm super excited that I'm going to be getting started with this in just like a little over a week. Oh, that's also really, really frightening. Brave little toaster. Anyway, thank you for listening to me ramble. Thank you for being present with me. And let me know in the comments below if you work with the runes, how you work with the runes, how you've approached them. Do you work with deities and the runes at all? And if you don't work with the runes, I would love to hear what your struggles have been in wanting to work with them, what you would like to know about them, and pretty much anything about the runes. The comments, talk to me about it. Yeah, totally one of my favorite areas of interest. Anyway, that is all for tonight. We might actually get my goal of an extra video out this week. Alright, anyway, lots of love. As always, hand hearts and love. And I will see you next week, maybe later this week. I don't know. I'll see you again sometime soon. Rambling probably for close to an hour about something related to my magical journey. Bye!